Another fascinating day on the news front, and who better to join us right now than two of the best? Political editor at the Daily Telegraph and Sky News host James Morrow, and our Queensland editor Peter Gleeson. Gents, welcome to the program.
Great to be here.
How are you, Smithy?
Good. With all the hoo-ha surrounding Scott Morrison's secret ministries and actions he took through the pandemic, there are calls for a broader inquiry. They've grown louder. I thought Nine's political editor Chris Uhlmann encapsulated brilliantly today in the Herald. It should not just be about Morrison, he said. Premiers, chief ministers, the squadron of health bureaucrats and the legion of assorted experts should line up to be part of an all-in inquiry into the pandemic response. James, you first. As Uhlmann says, future generations deserve an explanation for all of this pandemic panic and the things we got wrong and the things we got right.
Well, that's exactly right. And Chris Uhlmann has absolutely nailed it in this column, if I can give him that sort of, kudos here. He points out that $500 billion was spent, most of that, on shoring up the economy. Only a fraction of that actually went to, saving lives and that sort of thing that we talked about during the pandemic. Most of this was towards economic support. We also don't know anything about where did the advice come from for Dan Andrews to, close playgrounds and have all these long lockdowns and things like this? Even the WHO chief has said that the lockdowns were a policy failure. We need to go back. And I'm sorry, Chris, people need to be held accountable for the decisions they made, especially when they made them at the behest of pollsters and focus groups, and not on the basis of the so-called health advice.
100%.
Yeah, that's exactly what we saw, I think, in at least 3, maybe even 4 states. Now, Gleeso, we've got another National Cabinet meeting next week ahead of the Jobs Summit. Do you think the reason the PM hasn't pressed go for a pandemic inquiry is because the Labor premiers fear that their stuff-ups might get back in lights again?
I think that is absolutely spot on. Let's have a look at what happened during the pandemic and the way in which the Andrews government, the Palaszczuk government, the McGowan government nobbled National Cabinet. They nobbled National Cabinet. Have a look at the waste that happened in Queensland, the lockdowns, the border closures, the special exemptions that were applied to wives and girlfriends of football players, but not for people who wanted to come back into Queensland to see their loved ones who may have been dying in hospital. Have a look at the Wellcamp debacle. That was a knee-jerk reaction from a left-leaning Palaszczuk cabinet who just wanted to try and expose Morrison. Blind Freddie could see that was going to become a white elephant. Bring on an inquiry, Chris, because we want to know why Daniel Andrews, what advice he received to close that particular state for the longest of any particular state in the world. So, look, I think the Labor government's definitely nobbled.
It'd be better to have maybe what's called a pandemic summit rather than a job summit next week. But anyway, naval infrastructure, James, has become, glaringly exposed in Australia recently. Today, another proposal from Navy to acquire, not build, 3 new air warfare destroyers by the end of the decade. I hate to sound cynical about these grand plans, but it seems every second day we read a story about new subs, missiles, frigates or air warfare destroyers. It's time for less reviewing and more building, isn't it?
Well, yeah, but if there is one bright spot in this, Smithy, it's that they're talking about actually acquiring ready-made built products off the shelf rather than going through the whole political rigmarole of saying, hey, who's got a marginal seat that's kind of on the water? Should we build a naval shipbuilding facility there and then, letting that go on for 20 or 30 years? There does seem to be a real recognition now, finally, that the world is a dangerous place, and we have to be ready for it. Missiles are going to be the biggest part of it. I'd also like to see some follow-up on the announcements the previous Liberal government made about building missiles here in Australia. I haven't seen where that's gotten up to. I think we really need to be holding all of these parties to account on making sure that we have the defences and the armaments we need to give anybody who tries to have a crack a good punch in the nose.
Yeah, that missiles idea kind of fell into a cul-de-sac somewhere.